Welcome to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where we discover the communities that are making a difference in the lives of others. Our self-discovery is something we are all making on our life's journey. Here you will find the people that will be your guidance, that will be your inspiration, that will be there for you in support on your journey of life. Do enjoy. Our next show is... Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Mental Health Awareness right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today is Dr. Everett Bartlett, Domestic Violence and Affirmation Action, and he belongs to the Domestic Violence Coalition to end domestic violence altogether. Now, he's been doing some results, from as recent as November 3rd. The elections revealed broader voting dissatisfaction and affirmation action laws and policies that afford preference to certain gender, racial, and ethnic groups. The results suggest that the domestic violence laws, which for years have been given preference to females, are losing favor. We're going to discuss more about that today because we have a whole thing here for you to come and read, which kind of shakes everything up. But this is the conversation on, he was telling me before we started the show, rape is down and domestic violence seems to be kind of leveling off a little bit. So let's look at those statistics, but also how people can actually get through this festive season, which at the best of times can cause people to be more stressed out. Stress very often triggers violence and angst, and people don't know how to cope with it. So there's a lot that we have to learn here today. So welcome to the show, Everett.
Pleasure to be with you, Sarah.
Violence, domestic violence has been around since the beginning of time. And it's basically people who are dissatisfied with their own lives, don't know how to cope with it. Very often it comes from violence that's been imposed upon them as children. They've never learned to release it or to deal with it. And when they get frustrated, they take it out on someone else, whether it's physical, whether it's mental abuse. It's the inadequacy to be able to express oneself with the anger without, it imposing on someone else. So it's been around since the beginning of time, but you're saying at the present moment during COVID and Corona that the violence levels have been down, which fascinates me. Please do tell me more about that.
Well, it is fascinating, and I'll start out by saying, Sarah, that there are a lot of myths connected to this issue of domestic violence. One of those myths is that this is only about husbands exercising their patriarchal power and control over their wives. Well, it turns out that that's a very inaccurate picture. It turns out, and I'm going to be using really just American data in our discussion today. But anyway, according to the American Centers for Disease Control, it turns out that men are more likely to be victims of physical domestic violence than women. I'll give you the actual numbers. Each year there's 4.2 million male victims of domestic violence compared to 3.5 female victims of domestic violence. So that's just for starters. There's many other myths of domestic violence, and let's talk about what you were just mentioning a minute ago. So yes, this is one of these, call it urban legends about domestic violence, that with coronavirus and groups were warning about a spike, a spurt. They were using the most worrisome adjectives that you can imagine, foretelling of gloom and doom. Of course, they were only mentioning female victims. They never mentioned about male victims.
You don't hear about male victims. You just don't.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, but this, because there are so many myths connected to the domestic violence arena, when people started talking about this impending spike in domestic violence, I immediately became suspicious. So I thought, okay, let's follow this at the most reliable data, the most reliable information available, which are police reports. And even a person who is in a very claustrophobic situation, they still have a cell phone. If there's violence going on, a next door neighbor, especially in an urban setting, can hear that. So in the US, of course, we have the 911 call. So making a 911 call, it's not difficult to do, even when you're in a unusual or extreme circumstance. So my group, Center for to End Domestic Violence, we started tracking these police reports from all across the country. And we went online, we sent emails to the police department. We said, tell us your actual numbers. Well, this is what we found out. We got information from 30 different police departments all across the country. And out of those 30, 3 of them did show an increase, like a 10% increase in domestic violence. But the remaining, it was about half were just stable, essentially no change. But what was amazing is that in about 12 or 15 of these police departments, they actually saw a decrease in domestic violence incidents in terms of 911 calls that they were receiving. And so it totally destroys this legend that we were just going to see dead bodies around the street as a result of coronavirus.
Right. Um, I suppose one of the reasons could be is that a lot of the time, people are going out drunk or getting high, coming home and taking it out on the family. And if they're being isolated, they haven't got access to that. Right. And they've got to kind of deal with those demons right on the spot. Of course, there's many domestic violence that are never reported. So, you're only going by what is reported there. And there's some that are just too scared to because they're in the house and with coronavirus, you're locked down and you don't know where to go. So there are those cases. But, domestic violence on men, now I would have thought emotional domestic violence, words, accusations, this, that, etc., browbeating, as I call it, would be extremely high. But I'm really surprised at the physical, because you always think, the man is more dominant than the woman. So if the woman's physically beating on the man, is he just taking it? Is he fighting back? I mean, what's up with that?
Well, of course, many men grew up with the very strict admonition, thou shalt never lay your hand on a woman,
Right.
right? And that admonition was like issued like the 11th commandment issued from God. And so most men are very, thoughtful and careful about that. So again, the stereotype is very different from the reality. So, and I mentioned to you the numbers, 4.2 million versus 3.5 million. And actually that was not the first time we've known that. These are studies, actually they've been going back to the 1980s, the 1990s, studies done. University of British Columbia has done some studies about this, elsewhere in Canada, elsewhere around the world. The pattern that we have seen over and over again is that, well, first of all, a lot of these domestic violence cases are mutual, right?
Yeah.
So the woman slaps the guy
Hmm.
and he shoves her back.
Yeah.
That's a mutual domestic violence, and that's a fairly common scenario.
Yeah.
But for the unilateral domestic violence, it's about 50-50. We have, this is an equal opportunity problem.
Right. Do you find with different ethnic groups, different numbers?
So there was a study done that's asked this question in 32 different countries around the world, including several countries in Latin America and Africa and Asia. It was not just Western countries.
Hmm.
And again, I mean, there was some differences, in individual countries, but overall, this study, and this was looking at university students, overall found that, again, found that there were more male victims of physical domestic violence than female victims. And so I don't know that we can generalize by ethnic groups. I think there's evidence that shows that lower income
Yes.
persons are more likely to engage in domestic violence than higher income. But maybe the most surprising statistic is this: the group with the very highest domestic violence rates are lesbian couples,
Oh,
right?
really?
Not homosexual lower, but clear far and away higher among lesbian couples. So again, this theory of patriarchal,
Mm.
power and control doesn't quite hold up, does it?
Well, the power control can come in any form, shape or
Well,
size,
yes,
right?
yes, 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 right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably not patriarchal, but
Mhm.
it could be, there could be a power and control element to it. Yes.
I mean, whatever the statistics are and whatever the situation is, domestic violence is something that I don't think is given enough light on. It's brushed on, it's addressed, but it never seems to be given a good focus of, how can we stop this violence? How can we help people deal with their anger so they don't take it out on each other? From doing all of these shows and over 2,000 myself, I found a common denominator in anybody that's had to deal with anything. It comes from the inner child of neglect or seeing abuse or being abused, not being able to deal with their anger, repeating patterns unknowingly. And if we don't address, our past and what makes us angry in the first place, we're never going to be able to get a grip on it and redirect it, are we?
And that's clearly true in the area of domestic violence. You've probably heard the phrase the cycle of violence,
Yes.
and that's exactly what you've described, is the people who experienced or witnessed domestic violence as a child tend to rely on that when they become adults, and that becomes a pattern. That said, there are other mental health pieces to this. One
Mhm.
is alcohol or substance abuse.
Yes.
That's connected to, I think, like 60% of all domestic violence incidents. And then another one is partner discord and partner relationship breakup. And when we see a couple, breaking up, we do see much higher rates of
Mm.
domestic violence. But again, you look at all these three, you know, childhood abuse, alcohol, uh, relationship breakup, those are primarily mental health issues that suggest, why are we not paying more
Yeah.
attention to mental health root causes?
Right. I have a series called the Forgotten Children series, and it is about if we invest in our children now, water, nurture them now as children, we're not going to see such dysfunctional adults down the road.
Right.
And, I do feel it's a huge, big area that's being left enormous gap. And I'm going to hit on browbeating, the mental aspect of it, because it's not something that people call the police on. I was in a relationship with a browbeater. He was unhappy about something. He made sure, I used to call him a piranha. He would go into a totally different zone and he would just verbally attack you forcefully with a forcible energy until you were crumpled up on the floor. Never hit me, but emotionally completely beat me until I was just a pulp. There was no way of calling the police. How can you prove that? There's no physicality. So you've got the numbers on the physical thing, but the amount of people that are going for the emotional abuse, probably not be able to tell those numbers at all.
Yeah, and the sometimes that's referred to as coercive control,
Mm-hmm.
and there actually has been a lot of discussion about that part of it, and it's controversial
Yes.
because like the scenario you just described is of course it person victims of that circumstance need help, right?
Yes.
The perpetrator probably doesn't need to be incarcerated,
No.
but
Needs
probably
help.
needs help.
Yes.
So, but the problem is, and this is especially true in Australia, especially true in the UK, that they are actually talking about passing laws about what they call coercive control, but that the result would be throwing people in jail. So,
No, it's
so again, we're
we're
dealing with
repeating a pattern that doesn't
we're
work.
yeah we're creating even a more dysfunctional
Yes.
situation in the name of trying to reduce dysfunction. So it's recognizing that there are very important mental health roots to this problem. It's better dealt with primarily through the mental health system and only secondarily through the criminal justice
Right,
system.
I agree. It's much like what we're seeing with the defunding of the police. It's not taking the police away, but it's having social workers or other type mental health workers going along with the police and assessing what the situation is before guns are drawn. A gun is drawn on somebody who's going through a mental crisis at the time. All of a sudden, it's escalated out of reason, and they're going to react out, and the next thing you know, they're shot because
Right.
the cops are not trained in this. So I do agree, most certainly funding needs to come in where we see more forefront, social workers out there recognizing, is it dementia? Is it PSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Is it, Alzheimer's, autism? I mean, there's so many of these cases where, the gun is drawn and they don't know what they're up against. And if they had the right people there, they can assess it, they can calm the people down and defuse the situation. So I'm all for that. I think we need to see more of these workers and funding for these workers in our communities everywhere.
And it's really interesting. Just yesterday, I was watching a webcast of two senior police chiefs in the United States, and that was one of the questions that came up during the webcast, was this exact idea. And both of them said they're very open to the idea. Their concerns were just sort of more the practical aspects. One was the police chief of Baltimore, Maryland, and he said, well, in Baltimore, there's no entity, that's available 24 hours a day
Mm-hmm.
to accompany a police officer, at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
to deal with, a situation. So the barriers I think, are more logistical and practical and financing rather than, I think the
Financing.
concept,
Yeah.
uh, police officers, and they use the term co-responders. That was the actual term they used for this idea. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. And, as far as 2 o'clock in the morning, nurses and other people have shift work, right? And so there are plenty of
Right,
social workers who quite happily do a night shift.
right,
As opposed to a day shift, especially those with children at home and the husband can come home, then she can go to work. It happens all the
right,
time in nursing and every other industry. Why not in this industry? I
right.
just don't think there is enough money put into these type of resources. I hear over and over again, somebody with autism or somebody with mental stress, and out comes the gun, out comes the violence. For a lot of these people, it's, for even people in domestic violence, their trigger is immediately to go into that violent zone. They're not thinking, they're reacting. And if you're going to make the situation worse, they're just going to combust. So you
Mhm.
have to go in with calmness and diffusing the situation, which takes some artistry and training.
Exactly. And that was actually another point made during this webcast yesterday, is that, there's been a lot of discussion about excessive use of force,
Mm-hmm.
especially use of firearms. And one of the police chiefs made the point was, well, that's more a reflection of that the officer did not know how to intervene earlier on in the process in order to preclude the person charging at the police officer with a drawn knife or with a loaded gun.
Yeah. And the thing is, if it's a knife, then you've been trained how to bring those people down. You don't need to shoot them. If it's a gun, don't shoot to kill, shoot to maim. Right? The shoot to kill 7 times in the back or something like that, we call overkill. So also, I think what we have to do is look at the police force, and there has to be a whole new training in there on mental health, on dealing with situations. So not their own fear coming to the forefront, because that's what we seem to see is they're scared shitless and bringing out the gun first, shooting before asking questions. And we need to see more training there where they maybe do have a quick dial to an organization. We've got a situation here. We need you here to help calm the situation, or have training in that field. In the police force, people who are trained
Right.
as social workers, police, there is always a solution. I'm sick to death. What did this last election cost you? $14 billion or something ridiculous? Why is that money not going where it's really needed? You
Right.
know,
And,
it's
there's been a lot of discussion about, the term that's been thrown around is reimagining the police or reimagining law enforcement. And that's exactly the kind of idea that is being thrown around. How do we I mean, let's go back to domestic violence. So, so most domestic violence is not a life-threatening situation. Usually, I mean, I use the example of the woman slapping the guy and he shoved her back.
Hmm.
That's a fairly typical scenario. It's low level. Nobody's going to be, going to end up in the hospital with it. But when the police come, maybe it's the next door neighbor that heard
The
the
yelling and
noise.
screaming, yeah.
Yeah, and so the police come. So, what are the assessment tools that are available to help the police officer to evaluate the situation? Of course, you have to make that assessment very quickly. So there are assessment tools. We're still working to make those assessment tools better. So that's one of the cutting edge issues in domestic violence.
Yeah. I mean, quite honestly, at the present moment, I think that 2020 has been a revealing year. It's kind of brought what I call the scum to the surface, on all levels. And it's made us sit back and look at, my God, what a dysfunctional world we're living in, of our own making. And, I was given a saying that the universe here is to wake us up, to shake us up, to wake us up, for us to step up, change it up, and grow up, to a higher vibration, a higher frequency. And if ever there was a year that shook us up and has woken us up, it's been this year, not only on the pandemic side of things, the Black Lives Movement, the Me Too movement that started last year, the whole political thing that's been going on, which I called a hurricane, just causing hysteria, hysteria, hysteria. And that just puts everybody over on alert. And so that's where you see reactions of violence.
Right.
And there's so much that we have learned this year that we realize is broken. And now it really needs the leaders, all of the leaders of the world, but especially North America, to look into and bringing into the mental health workers, bringing in ethnicity workers where different cultures are involved, and looking at how can we resolve these situations? Where do we really put the money? Because everything
Right.
always comes down to money, doesn't it? The people are there, but you've got to put the money behind it to bring the people in the right order, in the right equation.
Yeah. Let's come back to the coronavirus issue. So I was sharing with you these dire predictions of a dangerous spurt in domestic violence, that those predictions, in not a single place in North America did those predictions come true, and in some places domestic violence went down and rape went down. So what is the reason behind that? Well, so there was actually a survey done by, it's called the American Community Survey, um, and they surveyed, several thousand people, and they asked them about how did how were their family relationships affected by coronavirus? And you might be surprised by the results of this, but the results show that the majority of people, 70, 80% of people, they said that they became more appreciative of their relationship with their spouse. They became more attentive to the needs of their partner as a result of the coronavirus. So I think that may well explain why we have seen a decrease in domestic violence, a decrease in rapes. And as you know, many rapes are between people who know each other. They're not strangers in a back alley. So, um, that I think is probably the best explanation we have, is that as a result of being forced to spend more time with your family and your partner, people are actually sort of relearning that appreciation for that relationship. So anyway, so that's my theory.
Or
Why?
no escape, right? Where can you go? You're in lockdown. There's no
Yeah,
escape. You can't
yeah,
go to the bar. You can't go to the gym to work it out. There are children at home that need to be schooled.
right, right,
And so it's like all of a sudden your role as a father and as a husband, or as a wife and as a mother, you're in this together, navigating this new road together. And it's like,
right,
we're all frustrated here. We're all, this is all new to us. Let's not argue about it. Let's just find a solution to it.
right,
And yeah.
right. So that may be the silver lining of the
Mm.
coronavirus, is that we are seeing sort of a strengthening of those family ties as a result.
Yeah. And, we know that anger on any level breaks down your immune system. Breaks down your psyche. It breaks down everything. It's a frustration that you can't express, and you don't know how to deal with. And, add on any mental health issue, because where does the anger come from? You may not have post-traumatic stress. You may not have all those other labels, but maybe you're just very easily triggered. It's something that's hereditary. Just that your frustration level is so high. You just
Mm,
don't know how to deal with something. And this, as I said, I've got 2,700 podcasts here. This is the time to really go, I don't have the answers, but they're out there. They're in the podcasts, they're in the TED Talks, they're in the webinars. And this is the time to go, I need answers. I have got time to sit and
mhm.
listen and learn. And
Right.
that's, I think, as human beings, we've got to stop looking at everybody coming and just putting a band-aid on the situation or fixing you. Is that if you listen to the experts around this field, they will show you the skills and tools that you can apply to yourself
Mhm.
to help fix the problem. There's always
Right.
a solution, but are you willing to look for it?
Right. And anger is certainly, that's the kind of mental health issue that can be treated, can be successfully treated, and learning to divert or focus that anger in positive, constructive ways. So yes, very much so. This, and I'll just say this to your viewers and listeners that if you're dealing with anger, that there is help available, and you can get over that anger, and you can be less likely to find yourself in a domestic violence incident.
The skills and the tools of what to do. I'm getting angry. I know things are going to get blown out of proportion. It's time to chill out. Go and take a walk if you can. Go and listen to some
Right.
music. Go and work out in the gym. Do something. It's
Right.
time to redivert it. Don't don't react to the moment, because when you
Right.
take that breath and you step back and you defuse, you come back and you don't look upon that whatever was happening as an attack, right? But instead as something to address more peacefully. So I
Right.
think the art of going, this conversation is later, let's both shelve it, take a deep breath and come back and look at it rationally.
Well,
And
it's the concept of boundaries.
yes.
Having a healthy sense of boundaries is so important, so that when somebody else acts out, says something inappropriately, calls you a name, your immediate instinct is, oh, well, what is that saying about that person's
Mm-hmm.
mental state at this moment in time? It says nothing. It says nothing about me that I'm being called a name, because it's obviously not true. So, but to do that, you have to have a healthy sense of boundaries, so that you're not, you're not drawn, you're not entangled
Yeah.
in that, in the emotions of that other person.
Mm. And fundamentally, we're all responsible for ourselves, right? Who we are, how we interact with people, what kind of life we live is our choice. Now, we don't always get to choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we react to it. And, the finger pointing, it's your fault, you did this, you did that. There's three pointing back at you. Where's your accountability,
Right.
right? And
Have-
it's not a blame or a shame thing. It's
Right.
about address the situation within yourself first.
Right. Have you ever heard the book Man's Search for Meaning?
Yes.
I've read the book. It was written by a fellow who was a survivor of World War II Holocaust of a concentration camp. And he, even going through that experience, he said, the way you respond to or cope with the situation is mostly up here in your own head and in
Mm,
your own self. And this is how he talks about man's search for meaning, is
mhm.
to be able to cope with situations by not internalizing these situations.
Yeah. That's a big thing, though, isn't it? Especially if you don't know the tools. I refer to this book a lot, Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. I don't know if you've read it, very thin, very quick. Metaphorical book of two mice and two men living around abundance of cheese, and one day the cheese is gone. And it's the four different reactions. I'm also a true colors coach, and so those four key personality traits very much match the characters that are in this book. And sometimes by identifying our own persona, our own traits, we understand why we react in the way that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And that as a particular, maybe a green person, they just may say something very dry and very short, and the other person wants more conversation and clarification. You're not going to get it from that person. They don't do it that way. So I think understanding what personality trait you are and what personality trait you're married to or with gives you a better understanding of how to address your language when you want someone to hear you,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Right.
in the conversation, because communication is, or the lack of, is where the issue is, isn't it? How do we communicate with each other where we're truly listening and not going on the defense, waiting to react? Or, how do we communicate in a way that that person is going to hear what I have to say?
Right. So I totally agree with everything you're saying, Sarah. Maybe we can bring this back to the domestic violence context. So in the United States, we have the most biggest law. It's called the Violence Against Women Act. And I've actually read through every word of the law. And it's both ironic and sad that there's not a single word anywhere in that law about mental health, alcohol
Mm,
abuse, couples counseling. And it's just mental health issues are just a foreign concept in that
yes.
world. So my organization, the Coalition to End Domestic Violence, is trying to first of all educate lawmakers that every time a woman slaps a guy, we don't have to throw her in jail every time.
Right.
Every time the guy, same other way around. The same is true. So to think of this issue in a different way, so that we can focus on roots causes,
Hmm.
focus on solutions, um, and I think as sort of I implied earlier when I was talking about this patriarchal power and control model, there's a lot of ideology tied in with this particular issue, um, and a lot of it goes back to the gender belief that domestic violence is how men uphold their power and control. Well, that's a very, call it, ideological statement.
Obsolete
And
statement, it should be.
yeah, and yes, sometimes person's need for control is a factor, but there's many other factors. And sometimes women engage in domestic violence because they feel like they're being ignored by
Hmm.
their partner, right? And so they slap the guy, they hit the guy, they throw something at him. That's not a power and control issue. They just want more attention.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what I'm saying is there's many motivations, and part of what we're trying to do is, take us away out of this world of ideology and put it into the world of, well, what does the science say? What is the evidence that backs up a certain approach? So rather than stereotyping, rather than stigmatizing certain individuals or groups, we need to get past those stereotypes and again look at these root causes.
Yeah. I call it intellectualizing. That's just the head analyzing. But we know that the intelligence of the heart, soul, and spirit needs to be in the equation. That is part of
Yeah,
your personality trait. And so many people shut the heart down because they've been hurt or they're scared. Well, they're shutting down an intellect there, and stopping the soul speaking their wisdom to you. And so you can get your spirit in the go. We need to help people open up on all levels, because if we just intellectualize it, you're in around and around and around in a circle, dissecting. Yes, but what if? Yeah, yeah. But we've got to feel, because what are happening with people that are in mental health? They're feeling, and they have feelings they don't know how to deal with. They're feeling the pain, they're feeling the confusion, they're feeling the loss, they're feeling unworthy. And there's so much feeling going on that if you're only going to approach it from an intellectual point of view, how are you going to ever understand and connect with the way they're feeling?
right, right. And I think that's really there's absolutely a growing awareness of exactly that this is much more of a mental health issue than a criminal justice issue. I'll just tell you, for example, in the United States, every state has its own what's called a domestic violence coalition, and it was almost miraculous this past summer. 46 of these state coalitions actually signed a statement. They called it the Moment of Truth statement, where they absolutely, in very strong terms, rejected this model that we have to always throw people in jail every time that there's one of these minor incidents. That there needs to be much more focus. And they talked about what they call restorative justice,
Mm-hmm.
which is very connected to what we're talking about now. So now it's not just a few people like or organizations like my organization. Now we have these politically very influential organizations in the U.S. that are agreeing that this throw them in jail if it moves concept is just doesn't work. And I'll tell you another reason why it doesn't work. In low-income communities, victims don't want their partner to be thrown in jail because partly they need the
Income.
person's livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
They're attached to that person. One of my former employees was a prosecutor of domestic violence cases. She told me about cases where um, a woman would come into court literally holding hands with a guy who supposedly had hit her. So the point is that, again, this model of we have to just reflexively throw people in jail is just being rejected across the board.
100% agree, especially in North America, as your jails are all privately owned and they're just packed by sardines, and all you're doing is throwing them into another violent arena. Where are they going to learn what they need to learn, about themselves, or are they constantly on guard and in defense? And that just isolates them even more from the problem. So
Mm.
it is not a cure. The people in jail should be the people that are really violent offenders, true and utter criminals. But I think an awful lot of people who do misdemeanors are thrown in jail that end up becoming criminals or end up becoming victims. And the whole jail system needs to be looked over. And I think that, if you've got somebody that's doing domestic violence, then all right, mandatory counseling. Mandatory counseling needs to be happen there. You have to attend or the threat of jail. Right. But throwing people in jail just for the sake of it, oh, it's easier. No, it costs the taxpayers more money to throw them in jail than it would be to have proper counseling and help.
Right. And there actually is a concept called diversion programs. They're pretty big in the U.S. and I think also in Canada. So if a person is arrested for, let's say, for domestic violence, that person is brought in front of a judge, and the basic deal is this: if you are willing to go to a 6-month alcohol treatment program or a 6-month anger management program, and if you successfully conclude that program, come back to court. We will vacate your criminal record. There will be nothing on your record,
Right.
and you can go back about your life having addressed this mental health issue, and with your record being completely clean. So it's
Right.
called a diversion program.
I want to
They
see more of that. Definitely want to see more
we
of that.
we want to see more than that. We
Yeah.
need to see. There are, I believe, about 20 of these programs. I think the closest to you is in King County, Washington. So they are being used. They are being developed.
But if there's
And
only 20 for such a massive size of
well,
America, there
that
certainly needs to be
that
a lot more, doesn't there?
that's a good point. So that's again speaks to we need to break out of this this ironclad ideology that we just have to throw more people in jail.
But, I think this has again been the year of reflection where we look at the ideology over a lot of things. And, we're realizing it just doesn't work. Look at the situation that we're in today. And the pandemic is one thing, and there's an economic pandemic now looming, but it's also the political pandemic. But it's also everybody's just kind of been stretched to their limit in some form or other. People have been living around fear. Fear has been fed to them on the news all the time. hysteria and everything else. And for people that are already vulnerable, it is such a trigger. We need calmer times. We need calmer leaders. We need people who are out there saying, yes, we really do care, because an awful lot of people feel at the present moment they're not cared for. They can't afford to look at how many people are losing their homes or being evicted. There isn't any work.
and
They're
losing their lives. I
living their
mean,
lives.
the
And
level of depression, the level of
yes,
suicides. You know, there's people that are saying there have been more suicides as a result of the
yeah,
lockdown policies than, and it's questionable whether those lockdown policies have actually saved lives. Let's say they have,
yeah,
but still we have, especially among the youth, we have so many youth that are depressed because they can't do sports, they can't be with their
mhm,
friends. They're sitting behind a computer all day, taking Zoom classes. That's no way to grow up and be a
yeah,
kid.
yeah. But you know, as I keep pointing out, we're very fortunate that we don't have bombs landing on us. We're not in famine. Right? We're not scared that there's somebody going to break into our house and put stars on us, you know, whatever the case is. So I think a lot of perspective needs to happen. This is a temporary glitch in time. The more that we all comply, the quicker we get through it, and look at it for the opportunity that it is. Assessing what is wrong and what do we do to put things right,
Hmm.
right? And that's really, really important. And, uh, you know, the thing about the domestic violence in the jail, no, the jail doesn't work. It really doesn't work. Most people just simply don't know how to handle their emotions. You know, and you've got people that become more vulnerable. um, it breaks down the immune system, which then brings about dis-ease, and so the whole health issue then comes into it. They can't afford health care. Right? They haven't got a job, and now it's a spiral down. And so, it really, when it all comes to it, what is the root of the problem? And the root of the problem is the money is not going to where it needs to go to support
Hmm.
people in need. So
Hmm.
that's right up the congressional level, political level. It has to be stop spending so much money on elections and everything else, and higher interests, and start putting money back into your communities. You're here to serve the people where they need it, and that's from the root cause.
For sure. Well, I completely agree with what you're saying, that the whole mindset that's basically dominated the domestic violence debate for the last 20,
Mm,
25, 30 years has taken us in the in a bad place. And now, uh, and actually, we've identified 102 organizations. I already mentioned the 46 state coalitions,
mhm,
but there's many other organizations that are not domestic violence coalitions, but they have related interests like immigration or, you know, men getting help, male victims getting help. So anyway, we've identified 102 organizations in the U.S. Who all are saying, yeah, we need to fix these laws.
yes. I've interviewed a lot of veterans, and what I love about the veterans, they're not reliving the war. It's about them recognizing the coming back and integrating back into society, how difficult it was because they're no longer the same person. You know, the wife and children expect that person to come back, and they're no longer that person, and they have triggers and everything else. And there was one that, with his first wife and kids, no, just, you know, his anger and everything, just couldn't cope with it, and it ended up breaking up the marriage. And he now is married to somebody who actually was a photographer on the front there, so kind of understood what he was going through, and but has helped him work through it. Now they have an organization where they help veteran partners reconnect, recommunicate, and come back together as they are today, because both people have changed. You know, the
Very much
spouse
so.
has
Yeah,
changed, raising, look after the children on their own, always waiting for that knock on the door. You know, the other person has changed because they've been in the war front. It's
right,
who are you now, and how do you come back together? Who
right, right.
addresses that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'll tell you a personal story. So I was actually drafted into the U.S. Army, and this goes back a number of years. This is during the Vietnam War era. I was not sent to Vietnam, but I was a draftee. I wasn't in the Army because I wanted to be there, right?
Hmm.
And I was in the United States for the entire time. I was a medical corpsman, and after about 2 years, I was honorably discharged from the Army. But it honestly, it took me about a year to kind of get over call it the frustration, the anger, or whatever it was. I'm not totally clear what that emotion was, but it took me about a year to get over that and kind of reconnect to sort of the normal everyday living.
Hmm. Right. So you can't expect these people just to snap back,
Definitely not.
and it's so many of them recognize, first they've got to recognize they have this post-traumatic stress, that they're a different person now and that things are going to trigger them. And that takes a lot for them to do, because as this one guy said, that he was a leader. So he was constantly in leader role and he was running his family as if they were in the military. And everybody was saying, back off, dad, back off. And he had to realize that, he had to defuse that. But where to go to do that, where other people understood? So many of the veteran stories that I've done are veterans recognizing the problem and themselves finding a solution to help other veterans. And we see this more and more, don't we? People of domestic violence, they know what the problem is. They may not know where the help is, so they create their own. But if we could put them all under one umbrella as a support, imagine how much, by empowering them, they can now empower their communities.
Hmm. Yep. Again, it's a different mindset. It's
Mm.
re-envisioning domestic violence. It's re-envisioning the role of law enforcement.
Yes, hugely, in many, 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 many ways.
Right.
We are in the Christmas realm right now. We're in December. And we also know that this time of year is a very high suicide year. Here alone, God knows how many deaths we've had from opioids, which is, another pandemic all on its own. But
Right.
it's a very high stressful time. And especially right now when people maybe don't even know if they have a home, they certainly don't have money to buy presents, they can't get together with family. We're going to see the stress level rise up. What help can we do for people right now? It just helping them through this emotionally or in any way that we can.
Right. Well, our options are somewhat less now than in the coronavirus era. I mean, it seems that every you know I think essentially all mental health encounters occur now by Zoom. Some of my colleagues that I know do their domestic violence counseling by Zoom. Maybe not 100% of their clients, but most of their clients. So that definitely, there's good and bad to that. On one hand,
Mm,
there's a little bit more anonymity, so persons can maybe are more likely to self-disclose. On the other hand, you know, there's only, sometimes that affectionate hug
mm.
counts for a lot more than, the words that anybody can say. So, yeah, we are definitely in a transition period right now.
Yes, most certainly. And I think they used to say it took a village to raise a child. Well, I think what we have to do is look at our village, whether in apartment blocks or whether in a house, what's in your neighborhood, is that this is the time to knock on the door of your neighbors and go, how are you doing? Are you holding up? How about we come together? On the roof, in the garden, wearing masks, respectfully distant, but come together and just chat. Just be there for one another. Not a bitching session, but a session of, this is how I feel and I don't know how to get over the feeling. Have other people, I understand that feeling. I was there. What did you do to get over it? Because we learn so much more by talking with other people. As I say, by listening to podcasts and everything else right now. The people I interview are the people that are either immersed in helping other people or have gone through it. And because they've gone through it, they now know how to help other people. So the help is there, but it's the reaching out. And I think a lot of the problem is stigma. Oh, no, no, everybody else is going through this. I need to toughen it up.
Mhm.
I've got to suck it up. No, everybody's going through this and everybody needs someone to talk to. Reach out to someone. If they say no, no, there's somebody else around the corner.
For sure, for sure. Well, I've really enjoyed chatting with you this afternoon. This has been an enlightening and wonderful conversation. And we're definitely of a similar mind about the importance of taking a mental health approach to domestic violence. And we're very hopeful that we will achieve many of these objectives in 2021.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the seeding has been planted, right? We just got to keep watering and nurturing it. So what does your organization do, and how do people become a part of it or get hold of it?
Well, we are a policy organization. In other words, we're meeting with lawmakers, we're meeting with staffers, we're also educating the public about these issues have a very important mental health role, and not just lock them up and throw away the key,
Hmm.
kind of cliche. So I'll give you our website address. It's end2, as in TO, end2dv.org. I'll say that a second time, end2dv.org. We have lots of information there about how can we make these laws work better.
And this, how can people participate in that? Can they write to you? Can they put forth something they want to see? Or, even organizations that are already out there helping that would love to align?
So there's people who want to get actively involved. Um, we do have a very active lobbying role, uh, primarily in Washington D.C. I am based in the Washington D.C. area, but of course there's every state has its own laws. Every province in Canada has
Mm,
its own laws as well. So much of the action takes place and needs to take place at the local level.
right. A lot of the time, people just don't know who to go to, don't know who to address, don't know what kind of question to ask. So if you've got any YouTubes or anything else like that on how to guide people to do that, a lot of people are visual people. They need to see and hear someone say it to them. If this has happened to you, you don't know who to go to, look to this organization or look to this person in government, and that's giving them the power to take action. But a lot of the time is, well, I don't know where to go.
That's right. A lot of this is learning the baby steps so we can make big steps together.
Right, which is extremely important. It would be lovely to see the back of domestic violence altogether. That is probably a little too ideological, but at the same time, is we certainly can make a dent in it by putting the right pieces in place to help diffuse the situation and empower people to manage their own issues so we do not see this violence.
Hmm.
I want to see those several million that you've just got record of, never mind the ones that don't have a record. I want to see that come right down. And it can do if we prioritize, if we
Hmm.
put the money where it needs to be. After,
Right.
if you're looking at profit and productivity, you've got to invest in people, planet for profit. You want to see them enriched in their selves, their home, a good job, a happy children. Then you're going to see more productivity, and you're going
Mhm.
to see more profit and prospering in a country. So it's short-sighted not to invest in the problem, but the root problem is going to cost you more in the long run.
That's right. That's right.
So again, the site is
Coalition to End Domestic Violence, www.end2dv.org.
excellent. And it's org, folks, not .com. And just go in and look. He's got so much material there for you to look at. Again, an awful lot of material here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. All you have to do is just put in his name, Dr. Everett Bartlett, and you will see everything there. This is not something, well, this doesn't affect me, so why should I? No, it affects all of us. This is a domino effect that affects all of us. And we all need to step up and in some way support it in order to change, because my God, does change need to happen. 2021, we want to see all these positive changes, right?
All good. Great to chat with you.
Great to chat with you, and thank you so much. So remember,
Uh,
folks, we're all in this together, and please step up. Don't turn a blind eye. We can't do that. There's always an answer. So until next time, bye for now. We hope you enjoyed the show. We look forward to bringing you more shows. Please go to selfdiscoverymedia.com/shows, and you will see the incredible lineup of genres and shows that we have for you. We are here to make a difference in your life. Thank you for listening.